Animals in World War II, the Forgotten Soldiers. America did not rise to global leadership by accident. It was forged in fire, sacrifice, and total commitment to victory. When World War II engulfed the world, the United States mobilized not just an army, but an entire civilization. Factories ran day and night, ships crossed hostile oceans, and American forces fought across deserts, jungles, mountains, and frozen plains. It was a war where ingenuity meant survival, and where every possible resource was pressed into service. Even in an age of tanks, bombers, and industrial warfare, victory often depended on something far older, something more fundamental than steel or gasoline. It depended on animals. In the harshest environments of the war, where engines failed, roads vanished, and supply lines stretched to the breaking point, animals became the silent backbone of military success. They carried food, ammunition, fuel, and wounded soldiers through terrain that defeated machines. They moved when trucks could not. They endured when men were exhausted. And though they never wore uniforms or received medals, their service was essential to the Allied victory that reshaped the modern world. Among the most remarkable of these animals were camels, long known as the ships of the desert. For centuries they had carried trade and empires across sand and heat, and in World War II they once again proved their worth. Capable of hauling massive loads for dozens of miles without water, camels thrived in environments that destroyed vehicles and weakened horses. Allied forces, including those fighting alongside American-led coalitions, relied on camels across North Africa and the Middle East to keep armies supplied in regions where mechanical transport simply could not survive. Camels carried ammunition under the burning sun, hauled fuel across endless dunes, and transported wounded soldiers away from the front lines. Their ability to endure extreme temperatures, scarce water, and brutal terrain made them indispensable. Yet this endurance came at a cost. Slow-moving and highly visible, camels were easy targets for enemy fire. Tens of thousands died not only from combat, but from exhaustion, disease, and neglect. Their losses were immense and largely unrecorded. Far from the deserts, another unlikely battlefield saw animals pressed into service in ways few Americans realize. On the Eastern Front, in the vast open steppes of southern Russia, both Axis and Allied forces turned to camels once again. Roads were primitive, distances were vast, and fuel was unreliable. In these conditions, camels became moving supply lines. One such animal, a Bactrian camel named Kuznechik, became part of the Soviet effort to hold Stalingrad, a battle whose outcome would change the course of the war. Carrying ammunition, food, and wounded soldiers through freezing temperatures and relentless bombardment, Kuznechik embodied the same resilience and determination that defined the Allied struggle itself. His ultimate fate remains unknown, but his service played a role in one of history's greatest turning points. In Asia, the war presented an entirely different challenge. Dense jungles, monsoon rains, and mountainous terrain rendered modern vehicles useless. In these conditions, elephants became irreplaceable. Massive, intelligent, and incredibly strong, they moved supplies where no road existed, dragged artillery through mud and jungle, and helped construct bridges and airfields critical to Allied operations. Elephants loaded fuel drums onto aircraft, pulled damaged planes from runways, and cleared dense vegetation to create emergency landing strips. In regions where the war was fought hand-to-hand with nature itself, elephants made movement and survival possible. Some of the most extraordinary stories of the war belong to these elephants and the men who worked beside them. In 1942, as Japanese forces advanced through Burma, refugees and soldiers found themselves trapped by flooded rivers and impassable jungle. With time running out, elephants were sent into terrain no vehicle could enter. They waded through monsoon-swollen rivers, carried the injured on their backs, and rescued hundreds from almost certain death. These were not isolated acts, but part of a larger, coordinated effort that kept Allied personnel alive and fighting. Perhaps the most powerful of these stories centers on James Howard "Elephant Bill" Williams, a man whose understanding of elephants turned them into a strategic asset. Leading a force of more than 1,000 elephants, he used them to move supplies behind enemy lines, evacuate civilians, and support Allied intelligence operations. One elephant in particular, Bandula, became a symbol of what this partnership between humans and animals could achieve. During a desperate retreat in 1944, Bandula led dozens of elephants, including calves, up a sheer cliff that humans had carved into steps by hand. What seemed impossible became reality, and every elephant survived. Bandula did not live to see the end of the war. He was later killed, his tusks taken, and his body buried near the Burma-India border. Carved into a tree above his grave were the words, "Killed in action," a phrase usually reserved for human soldiers. It was a quiet acknowledgement of a truth history often forgets, that victory in World War II was not achieved by humans alone. When Americans look back on the Second World War, they remember courage, unity, and overwhelming determination. They remember a nation that rose to defend freedom across the globe. But beneath the roar of aircraft and artillery was a quieter story of endurance and sacrifice. Animals carried the weight of war on their backs, moved armies when machines failed, and helped secure the victory that shaped the modern world. They had no flag, no voice, and no choice. Yet without them, history might have turned out very differently.